No introduction. We can't thank you enough for carving out an hour of your unbelievably busy schedule. There's no
Oh, it's
off
so
season.
busy. You're interrupting my Jeopardy watching.
You watch that even though Aaron Rodgers isn't hosting? Is it what could have been there?
Rumor has it Aaron Rodgers is going to be moving to my former town of Upper Montclair, New Jersey.
Ooh. Well, why don't let's really just head first leap right into that topic, because when we had you on 2 years ago, I could be mistaken, but that was right when the Packers had no clue what in the hell he was going to do. And you had the theory, if I remember right, you wrote, here's something that Mark Murphy could do that can somehow mend the fences, come together. They did. And he won an MVP, lost in the playoffs. They go 8-9. He's gone. What happens in New York with Aaron Rodgers? How does his career end here out there?
Well, I think you have to ask yourself, it's the same thing. A little bit of the same thing, not exactly, but I find myself asking a bit about DeAndre Hopkins. And look, I've been off. This is my 10th consecutive Monday without writing. And I have really, in my time away, I decided right after the draft, with NBC's blessing, that I was going to just go on a hiatus. I'm just not a big fan of writing in, the 2 to 2.5 month period between post-draft and the beginning of training camps. I think that there's far too little going on and people make far too much of the far too little. But anyway, I was actually on my way home when I started reading from Europe, when I started reading about this DeAndre Hopkins, and I said, hang on one second. I mean, we should really think about, kind of who DeAndre Hopkins is right now, because I think a lot of times we start to think, and I'll get to Rodgers in a second, but I wanted to give you my feeling about how the NFL is covered these days, and the way that, in my opinion anyway, I think that because everybody in the media who covers the NFL is required to get up and go to work in the morning and figure out something to do.
Yeah,
and I get that. I understand it, but for various reasons, in the last 2 seasons, DeAndre Hopkins has played 19 games and he's missed 15. He has had a suspension for substance abuse for 6 games. He, at age 30 last year, when he was in Arizona, and I don't have inside information on this, but a lot of people think that he could have played at the end of the year and didn't because he figured what for, which I doubt went over very well in the locker room. But be all that as it may, we also have a guy, DeAndre Hopkins, who, last year when he did played 9 games, he averaged 11.2 yards a catch. Now, you can blame the quarterback or lack thereof in Arizona, and I get it. He's not exactly going to a team with, a great quarterback. Ryan Tannehill has really had his issues the last couple of years, mostly starting with the playoff game against Cincinnati. But anyway, And so as I read, oh my God, DeAndre Hopkins, what a catch, what a find, oh, what a great player. Look, in his prime, DeAndre Hopkins was a great football player. And in Arizona, he had one excellent year, 2020. And then he had 2 injury/substance abuse plague seasons in which he was just a guy. And so, maybe he'll be great. I don't know. Nobody knows. But I don't necessarily believe because a guy had a great name 5 years ago that, oh my God, what a find. And I feel the same way about Odell Beckham, honestly. But, we'll see. We'll see what he does. Now, as far as Rodgers goes, I mean, he's coming off a mediocre for him year, less than mediocre, honestly. One of his worst years in the NFL since he got the Green Bay starting job in 2008. And he's a year older. And I know he's going to have great expectations, the weight of great expectations on him. And he sometimes is chafed at what he considers unfair media coverage. A lot of people in the NFL think Aaron Rodgers has rabbit ears. And so, I don't know. We'll see. I think he's got a chance to have a very good year, in part because I think his defense will help him a lot with the Jets, and because he's going to have good weaponry on his offense. And they just really, really need Garrett Wilson to stay healthy. That's going to be absolutely integral for that team. And we'll see if, obviously Green Bay to New York is a big deal, going from the smallest market to the largest. But I've never really considered that to be all that significant in terms of whether a guy is going to make it or whether he isn't going to make it, for a very simple reason. If you're a quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, you are a national figure. It isn't just, oh, you play in a small town so you don't get covered. You get the crap covered out of you. And people are talking about you all the time. So I don't think that is the big deal. I think it'll be just interesting to see the weight of expectations on him. And by the way, I think the Green Bay Packers absolutely unequivocally did the right thing. It was time to go. It simply was time to go. When I started hearing these, it's hard to get cell reception in my house in California. Give me a friggin' break. All that stuff, it's silly. It's excuse making. Rodgers wanted to go and he went, and we'll see what happens.
Hell of a breakdown, Peter. It is crazy. I mean, I feel like he almost started, lying is a strong word, but creating his own reality, and was tripping over himself in every interview to the point where everybody heard the cell reception stuff. It's like, okay, what the hell's going on here? Enough's enough. But I loved your point on just how the NFL is covered this time of year. I mean, could you have ever imagined back in the 90s, early 2000s, even like the early 2010s, that a lot of people, a lot of big corporations, big companies, they cover the league through Instagram GIFs and memes and quotes like that's, and it's hype season. That DeAndre Hopkins trade, what a perfect example. It's universally praised as that he's a star, but I'm with you. It seems like Tennessee's kind of where these receivers are going to die for a while now. So I'm not sure how that's going to work out.
Yeah, the way I look at Tennessee is, who would you rather have? A short-term DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks, or A.J. Brown and whoever else you could have had for not very much money as a rookie in the third round of the draft? Or, I mean, they didn't pay A.J. Brown, but now for 2 years, they're paying pretty big money to DeAndre Hopkins. And I just think that the downfall, at least last year's downfall of this team, began with the decision to not pay A.J. Brown and to trade him for the pick that became Treylon Burks. Now, Treylon Burks showed some flashes last year. He could be a really good player. And he could be a very average player. We'll see. But I think that Tennessee, at least my thought about Tennessee is it all comes down to the quarterback. And Ryan Tannehill is going to have enough weapons to be a top 10 score for Tennessee to be a top 10 scoring team. So now I think it's going to be up to him.
So we've got our usual blend of Packer fans and Bills fans here on the happy hour. So if anybody wants to jump in and ask the legend, Peter King, Football Morning in America. I didn't really introduce you well enough. I should have gone on and on, Peter, but we all know that you're the king.
Well,
no pun intended. So.
We're all here together. We're all here just to talk, so we can talk. we don't have to do any of that stuff. But anyway, thank you.
No, thank you for making time. So if anybody wants to jump in, go right ahead.
I'll jump in. Peter, thanks for taking the time tonight. So I'm a big fantasy football player, and I love reading your reports of training camp because I think that you can get a good idea of the drum beats for certain players by reading your reports based on your conversations with the coaches and the players. So when you're getting these, when you're having these conversations with the different teams, have you come to learn how to parse through the information that you're getting about the players? Because I presume there's some level of just baseline rookie hype or player hype. But then if you start hearing something from a certain type of personnel person or coach, do you start paying attention to it more that, hey, this player maybe really is on the precipice of a breakout?
Well, that's an interesting question. I try not to ever, when I go to these teams, I try not to swallow everything, all the optimism, hook, line, and sinker, because every team is optimistic in late July and August. But, for instance, I'm going to go to Baltimore, and one of the things, and again, I'm going early. I'm going like in the second week of camp. So a lot of it depends, by the way, on when you actually go. I'll be there, I think, on August 2nd. And I'm not sure that even sidling up to John Harbaugh and having a clearly off-the-record conversation that I'm going to learn all that much about his plans, because for Zay Flowers, let's say, and for how many snaps Odell is going to get in that offense. I think it's hard to tell early on in training camp what exactly is going to happen. However, there are sometimes, I remember clearly going to Texans camp the year that, I forget if Arian Foster was either a rookie or he was second-year guy, but I think it was when he was a rookie. And I said, hey, Arian Foster, the way that the Texans want to run the ball and the fact they have a pretty good offensive line, don't really trust their passing game as much as you would want them to. I think Arian Foster's got a chance to have a huge year for this team. And, those are the kind of things you can get a feel for, things like that. But I've also been wrong an awful lot when I leave a place and think player X is going to be good and all that stuff. I'm the guy who, the first year Steve Spurrier was the coach in Washington, in fantasy football was like a 20th of what it is now. I told everybody to draft Danny Werfel. So I oftentimes say to people, I might know a little bit more than just by reading and scouring the internet and all that stuff, and I get it. But I've gotten to the point where I try not to say, hey, like at some point in the next, month, 6 weeks, I'll either write or do a video on, here are the fantasy, here's 10 things I think you should know about fantasy football from my trip. And I'll try to pick out a few guys. And I'll also say, I would not take player X. I will end up having a decent feel for it. But the other thing is, after having been in it for so long, you sort of know who's real and who's blowing hot air. Like, for instance, I'm going to go to Atlanta, and I really trust Arthur Smith. And if I say to him, gut feeling, how many touches a game for Bijan? I think he'll give me his gut feeling. Tell me about Kyle Pitts and Desmond Ritter and all this other. I'll be able to get a pretty good feel out of there. There are some places where you're really not going to get a very good feel, but you just try to make sure that, honestly, you try to make sure you don't mislead people. That's the thing I really try to do when I'm looking, because I realize how important to so many of my readers and followers in any, of any sort, how important fantasy football information is. So, I just try to be as honest as I can when I'm at each camp and I'm talking to the people who are going to be involved in whether Bijan Robinson gets 17 touches a game or 9.
Are there any tells, like when somebody's bullshitting you and this is a bunch of hot air, one way or another? Are there, like, is it body language? Is it tone of voice? Like, how do you tell?
Mainly, Tyler, it's I know I have a pretty good feeling after being around a lot of these people for a long time of it's the same thing as finding out stuff about the draft. You have a pretty good feel because for such a long time, many of these guys I've known ever since they've been in the NFL. So, yeah. But there are also new people. Like, I'll be in Indianapolis. I don't really know Shane Steichen well. And I mean, I know Chris Ballard pretty well, the general manager. But you also have to realize that a lot of these guys, when you're talking to them, they might think they know what it looks like now. But a lot of times, too, somebody gets hot at the beginning of the season and they just really can't tell. So I think it's overrated how many people in the NFL will lie to the media. I really do. I don't think necessarily that a lot of people lie per se, but I think that they will do the best job they can in not telling you the whole truth. And I do think there's a difference.
That's so perfectly said.
Hey, Peter, kind of following up on that, Matt LaFleur has spent all offseason kind of downplaying expectations for Jordan Love. Do you think that's how much truth do you think that's just kind of setting expectations for fans, for the team, or for Jordan?
Well, I guess the way I would look at that is, if you look back at the first year that Brett Favre was a starter, he wasn't very good. You look back at the first year that Aaron Rodgers started, and he had his career high in interceptions. And the Packers went, I think, 6-10. And so I think that it'd be fairly unrealistic with what will likely be the youngest wide receiver core in football, and with an offensive line where a couple of guys are getting pretty long in the tooth. I think it'd be unrealistic for Matt LaFleur to say anything but that, because I think, first of all, Jordan Love in his first 3 years in the NFL has had one game with a chunk, whatever it was, 3 or 4 series, where he actually looked like a very promising player. And you look at Aaron Rodgers in his first 3 years, however many passes he threw, probably like 60 or 70 balls, you really had no idea whether he was going to be any good. I remember Bob McGinn, I think in training camp of his 3rd year, was really kind of, I don't want to say altogether negative, but he just thought that Rodgers had a long way to go. Now, that might have been his 2nd year, but I remember one year when I was in Green Bay, even though Favre was still there and you thought he was going to play forever, Rodgers was not doing great in training camp. So, but I only say that because I don't really expect great things out of Jordan Love this year. And I think it would be unrealistic to do so with the support system he has and with the fact that they're kind of throwing him to the wolves now after he hasn't had a lot of chances to play.
This is where we got to shut it down, Peter. This is a Jordan Love friendly space. We're just going to have to.
I like Jordan Love. I think he's got a chance to be good, but I think it's really hard for young quarterbacks to be great early on. And look, you might say to me, geez, like if you said to me right now, give me your one kind of upset pick, I think everybody, as we sit here on July 17, nobody would be that surprised to hear that I'm very bullish on the Lions, as a lot of people are. But I'll tell you, a team I'm bullish on too is the Atlanta Falcons. And to do very well in their division, maybe win their division. We'll see. And you might say, well, geez, how come you're, just so-so on Jordan Love and you're apparently bullish on Desmond Ridder? I don't know whether I'm bullish on Ridder or not. I do know that the Atlanta Falcons have a top 8. They're in the top quartile in the NFL in terms of offensive weaponry. There aren't many teams that are going to have a backfield with a dual threat weapon like Bijan Robinson and Steve Sarkisian around the time of the draft told me that he could have easily converted him to wide receiver, and if they really needed him to be a wide receiver, he would have been the best guy on their team. So you got a double threat guy in Bijan, but remember, Tyler Algier was a guy who I voted for Offensive Rookie of the Year last year. On a moribund offense, for him to get over 1,000 yards, for him to have some huge days, I thought was a really great performance. So they obviously have a good young offensive backfield. Kyle Pitts needs to play better. We all know that. Cordero Patterson is an incredible weapon. And I think, their receivers, their young receivers, including Drake London are obviously have a chance to be real good. So my point is, I think the tools around him that Desmond Ridder has are going to stand him in really good stead. I don't think he has to be the second coming. I think he's got to be competent. I don't know whether Desmond Ridder is going to be competent, but I also don't think that's going to be a transcendent quarterback division in 2023 either.
I'm right there with you too. I know Ridder isn't exactly Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, but like Cincinnati 2 years ago, Jacksonville a year ago. I mean, Atlanta went nuts in free agency because they had the money to spend. You might as well spend it. I mean, they added some really good players, Jesse Bates, Calais Campbell. And doesn't it seem like they're a team, and we don't have to talk about the Falcons for an hour, but I just love that point. Like they're a team built in a way that defenses across the NFL aren't built to stop. Like they are going to punch in the mouth right when a lot of teams have 230-pound linebackers, the defensive lines are so built now to stop the wide zone. They're kind of moving laterally. Well, Arthur Smith's going to get guys going fast uphill. I don't know. That's definitely a team. I know everybody's optimism is through the roof this time of year, but I'm right there with the Atlanta Falcons.
The one other thing I would say about the Falcons is that, Arthur Smith is going a little bit counterculture. If you think about it, okay, think about this, in 2 straight years, he basically has, in the top 10, taken formidable offensive weapons, in Drake London and Bijan Robinson. And if you look at the other players they have right now, I kind of look at it like I remember being in Vegas camp last year, and the star of the day when I was there was Mac Hollins. And I think he's a really, really interesting prospect for them. The other real interesting prospect, who Tom Brady absolutely loved. He couldn't stay on the field a lot. He was hurt some. So I don't know what that means now, is Scotty Miller, the Smurfy little slot receiver. I just have a feeling that this coaching staff is really going to know how to use some extremely good weapons on this offense.
Hey, Peter, I'm thinking back to that interview you did at the Mike McCarthy barn up outside in Green Bay a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And as he, gets ready to assume his play call duties in Dallas again, I'm curious if you think there's, he's evolved. Like if he learned from that time off, if you think we're really going to see a different Mike McCarthy in that role, because I'm super intrigued by Dallas. I think it looks kind of from the outside like a really volatile, situation in a number of ways, and curious kind of what you're thinking as you prepare for your camp visit there this season.
Yeah, it's odd. I'm only going to see the Cowboys in a preseason game in Seattle. I'm not going to go to their camp, but I'm going to spend some time with them after that game. So I don't think I'm going to see, for instance, the ones on offense do very much. But be that as it may, I just think that what happened in Dallas is that Mike was uncomfortable with a few things they were doing on offense, and a few of the things they did play calling. I think he was uncomfortable with that, and it's another reason. I mean, I'm not necessarily anti Mike McCarthy taking this over. He knows what he wants his offense to be, and when his offense has the weaponry, it's really, really good. I do think, though, that, I said this after last season ended. And again, I think this is a bit of a controversial way to look at it. But if you gave me my choice last year, at the end of the season, between a healthy Dak Prescott and a healthy Brock Purdy, I'd take Purdy. Now, that isn't all performance related. It has something to do with the fact that I don't want to pay Dak Prescott $1 jillion. I don't want to pay a lot of quarterbacks $1 jillion. And I'm not trying to be an old fuddy-duddy about this, but I would really like to see Dak Prescott play great in big games, like in really big games. And I think that is something that he still needs to do. Now, in 2021, I was very much on the Dak Prescott bandwagon. He threw for whatever 4,500 yards or whatever it was, mid-30s touchdowns, kept his interceptions down. And I just thought he had really evolved and was really at one with McCarthy in that system. But last year, even though, obviously he was hurt a little bit of the time, last year, I don't think that he continued his evolution. And I think one of the things you're going to see Mike McCarthy do with him, I think, this is just my feeling, I think he's going to coach him a little bit harder than he has been coached. That's just how I look at it. I think McCarthy sees a quarterback who's talented, who probably is going to be the long-term Cowboys quarterback. And this kind of one of the same problems I have with Lamar Jackson, has not been a good playoff quarterback. And in the NFL, that is what it's about. It's about playing great when the games are the biggest. Dak Prescott has won 2 playoff games. And, he's simply got to do better than that. So I think I look at McCarthy this year. I think he's going to coach this quarterback a little harder. And, the one thing I do like about what the Cowboys did last year, they said, look, we know we're paying Ezekiel Elliott, whatever the number was last year, I forget, 10, 12 million bucks, whatever it was. But the fact is, Tony Pollard's a better football player, and he is. And maybe he's not better on the goal line, but that's about the only place he isn't better than Ezekiel Elliott. And the Cowboys last year finally came to their senses. And, you got to be careful because, Tony Pollard is a little bit like, so many of these pitchers in baseball now, where if you overuse them because they're just not simply being used to being horses the way they were in Nolan Ryan and Bob Gibson's day, that you're going to wear them out. And I do think that they were smart about Tony Pollard, but they also know that Tony Pollard is better in today's football for a running game than Ezekiel Elliott is. So good for him. Apparently he'll play under the franchise tag. And I think now you look at it and you look at Dallas, and I just think I think Mike is going to be demanding of Dak Prescott. Not to say that, last year that a lot wasn't demanded of him. It was, but I think he's going to get coached harder this year.
Peter, what to you just defines a Mike McCarthy offense? You know what I mean? Because, back when I covered Green Bay, it was a lot of Aaron Rodgers on autopilot, doing his thing, changing plays, second reaction. Didn't have a lot of respect for Mike's offense pretty early on, but they had a lot of success, so it's hard to figure out who deserves credit for that. Then it kind of ran its course. I don't know, you think of like Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniel, a lot of these coaches around the NFL, Sean Payton, you kind of know what defines their offense schematically. If you were to ask me like what is a Mike McCarthy offense, I don't know if I could really give you an answer right now. I don't know, because the play calling's kind of been in and out of his hands. It wasn't Green Bay, it is here in Dallas. It's always hard to tell who's doing what behind the scenes. But what is it to you?
I think he, the times I've talked to him, he's so huge on balance. And, I think one of the things that you look at in a McCarthy team is, last year they were, I'm going to guess, somebody I'm sure could figure this out, but they were about 54% pass, 47% run, something like that. And I think that's about where McCarthy wants to be, because I think he knows that, he will pair Tony Pollard with somebody else in the backfield. And last year, even though Ezekiel Elliott had more rushes, he was way behind him in yards and like 1.5 yards behind him in yards per carry, something like that. And I think one of the things that McCarthy wants to do is I think he always would like to have a team that's going to run, say, 45% of the time, because I think he believes that their quick strike ability is good enough. I mean, if you look at it, the last half of last season, and again, I'm proud. I'm going to be off a little bit, but I think in the last half of last season, they had 40 points or more in a game 4 times, and it might be a little bit more than half, but I think he believes that that's the kind of stuff that works. I bet if you go over a bunch of those games, it's not Dak Prescott every game throwing for 410. Well, I mean, because he obviously didn't have that kind of year. And, obviously there was whatever it was, 4 or 5 starts for Cooper Rush. But I think I look at this as McCarthy is going to prove this year that the run isn't dead. And I think he is not, I'm fairly sure that he is not convinced that Dak Prescott should be a guy who throws it 650 times a year. I think he believes that, if Dak can play a 17-game season, you throw it, 30, 33 times a game, and you really try to eat the clock a lot. They've got a very good offensive line, and I think that's the kind of offense you'll see with them this year.
Good stuff.
Hey, Peter, I have a question. I had a question about what's going on in Washington Redskins or Washington Commanders Generals.
Yep.
It sounds like league's going to Minneapolis to vote on changing ownership. But an article came up with ESPN about the Raiders feeling the letters from Gruden or the emails from Gruden were leaked and everything. And now today they're coming out, the guy that does the finance is hiring an attorney to represent him, that Washington was cutting corners and skimming off the top and stuff like that. Is the NFL going to kind of be done with that? Is that going to get swept under the rug? Is more things you think are coming down the road for Washington? Where are we kind of going with this investigation and that?
There's a lot of people around the NFL who will lose a lot of respect for Roger Goodell if he doesn't release a full report replete with details of what happened inside that franchise. And look, Don Van Natta and Seth Wickersham have done a tremendous job reporting on all those issues related to Snyder, and good for them. It's been very, very needed. But Roger Goodell knows he needs to come clean. He's on the record 2 or 3 times now, vehemently saying, we will release a report. What bothers me about what the NFL has done in this case is they have basically let Daniel Snyder be the tail that wags the dog. It's clear that it was total bullcrap that they didn't release the Beth Wilkinson report on this team. And they were doing it because they felt like, listen, if we just play nice with Dan Snyder, he's going to go away. And that's how it looked 6 weeks ago. And again, I have done 0 reporting on it. I've been off for 2 months. So I don't really know a lot. I just know there's absolutely no way that that anybody in the NFL wants Daniel Snyder to own this team, and they basically need him to disappear. Now, the only other thing I would say about all this is that, with a lot of the reporting, and I read the Wickersham Van Natta story, the most recent one from last week. But the thing that I took away from that is that, if you give Dan Snyder an inch, he's going to take a mile. And so the NFL, I think the NFL, what the NFL needs to do right now is, if he continues to try to be all mealy-mouthed and not say directly what he plans to do, even though he has this, 600 and whatever, or $6.05 billion deal to sell the team to the Josh Harris group. The NFL has got to stop namby-pambying with Dan Snyder, period. They need to say, in essence, look, we're going to make it impossible for you to continue to own this team. You want to be Al Davis? Okay, we'll take you to court till the cows come home. You'll be the most reviled man in the history of Washington sports. You are now, and it'll be 3 times as bad, because if you hold on to this team, you will be hated like no man has ever been hated. And we're giving you the opportunity to get a golden parachute and to get out. And you need to do that. And look, there's little doubt in my mind where that stuff was originally leaked. And to me, I've believed all along, not that it's anything I've ever proven, but I've just had a gut feeling that it has some Washington person's fingerprints all over it. But, we'll see what happens. But the longer this goes on, the more that it just leaves that team twisting in the wind. And a team that, last year, I remember, this was a team that was playing very good defense in the middle of the season. They won 6 out of 7 games. And I just said, I thought they'd make the playoffs. And then they collapsed down the stretch. And the only way you're going to fix this team is to get some degree of stability. Figure out whether Howell's the quarterback this year. If not, move heaven and earth to move up to get one of those really good ones. And but they're not doing anything positive as long as Daniel Snyder owns that team.
It's one of those things that the older you get, the more you realize how important strong, stable ownership is in pro football. Jim Monas says it all the time in our podcast. Like, it all starts with ownership. If there's chaos at the top, everything is just going to crumble like a house of cards, isn't it? You probably have seen it year to year to year.
Well, there's 2 things that really determine, I would say ownership is number 3, but there's 2 things that are vitally important, in my opinion. One is a quarterback. 2 is a very strong coach who can put his fingerprints and imprint on the team. And then obviously what happens with an owner, and look, it isn't necessarily a single person, but because when I think of the Green Bay Packers right now, I think of Brian Gutekunst as the driving force in that organization. And, Mark Murphy is in essence, the de facto owner, and I get that. But the guy who's driving the boat is Brian Gutekunst. And I'm sure that people in Green Bay might have differing opinions on that. But look, the reason why Aaron Rodgers is gone, I think, is not only because Aaron Rodgers wanted to be gone, but it's because Brian Gutekunst said, listen, if I can't get this guy on the telephone, if he can't make time for me to fly to the West Coast and talk to him face to face, we got to go. It's time to go. And I think that is exactly what happened. And I think in that particular case, I applaud the Green Bay Packers, because think back now. First, it was Ron Wolf, who told everybody, hey, get out of the way. I'm putting Holmgren and Favre in charge, and they're the ones who are going to run this team right now. And then, when Favre waffled year after year after year about whether he was going to play, wasn't doing anything in the offseason, they said, okay, listen, Ted Thompson, Mike McCarthy, they say, hey, we're moving on to Aaron Rodgers. And now Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst are doing the same thing. So, yes, ownership is vitally important, but in Green Bay, it's different. It just works in a different way. And look, I think that strong ownership leads the way, and it's great and all that stuff. But I still think that the most important two things in any organization today, and on some teams, it's a little, you might argue that, well, in Tennessee, maybe I would say it's Vrabel, Tannehill. And in Kansas City, maybe you'd say it's even, Mahomes and Andy Reid. But in Cincinnati, I'd say it's Burrow and then Zach Taylor. But I just think those two things are a little bit more important than ownership.
Just while you're on it with Gutekunst, do you think there was a moment where he knew, okay, it's time, like a turning point, or I don't know, like when did they mentally get to that place of let's trade Aaron Rodgers? Because they could have done it the last two off seasons. They didn't take their bounty of first round picks, whatever.
Do you remember? Hey, Tyler, do you remember when Adam Schefter reported one weekend, I think in the playoffs, maybe late January, that I expect the Packers to consider trading Aaron Rodgers, blah, blah, blah. This is real, whatever, well, all that stuff he said. And I forget exactly what it was. But it was clear that, the Rubicon had been crossed. Adam is not going to report that stuff based on innuendo. And I think what the Packers were starting to realize is exactly like Brett Favre was in the early off season of 2008 after the bitter playoff championship loss to the Giants. I think they were realizing that Favre was going home to Hattiesburg, and they would see him for mandatory minicamp the first weekend of June, and they wouldn't see him until then. And they had a quarterback who they believed in, who was entering his fourth year, and it was time to bleep or get off the pot with him. So they made the bold thing. Hey, if you want to be in the off-season program and you want to tell us for sure that, in early March you're going to be back, you're our guy. If not, we're moving on. And that's when Favre retired. And I think early on this offseason, they said, look, it was a disaster last year when Rodgers wasn't involved in the care and feeding of the new rookies. And once they couldn't even talk to Rodgers, I think they just said, enough. We got to go. We got to move on. And they did the right thing. It's not always the popular thing, but it's the right thing.
Anybody else have some questions here? We've got folks all over the country.
I've got one. Peter, I'm just wondering if you know or have a feel for how close Baltimore and Lamar Jackson came to not getting a deal done.
I don't really think that close.
Yeah.
Because Lamar saw nobody out there wanted him. And again, that's a startling thing to say. And I do think there's one team that should have gone after him hard and made a huge mistake in not doing so, and that is Washington. Because Lamar would have been motivated to stick it up the Ravens' rear end. The Ravens, I think, depending on whether the contract was built to be exceedingly hard to match, I think there's a chance the Ravens would not have matched and would have let him go and taken the 2-1s. But when Lamar found out essentially that nobody out there wanted him and nobody wanted to sacrifice what it would take to get him, I think he knew that he basically had to make the best deal he could. And honestly, he made what I think is an absolutely fabulous deal. I just think he got far more than I ever thought he was going to get. And I think part of that is the Ravens felt incredible pressure to re-sign him, and also felt like they had a contending team right now. And I'm sure what Eric DeCosta would have done is, if they did let him go, would have been to take a quarterback in this year's draft and to try to get him ready to play early on. Thing that I think there's a good chance that would have happened, just my opinion, I think they would have gone out and signed a guy like Matt Ryan and would have given him the reins for 1 year while they got another, their quarterback of the future ready. But, there's one thing right now that I think we all have to acknowledge about Lamar Jackson. Okay. And again, Lamar Jackson, incredible 2019 season, a fantastic, charismatic, magic man kind of season. But the fact is that Lamar Jackson has won one playoff game in his Baltimore career. In 5 seasons, one game. In the last two seasons, he has missed 35% of the offensive plays that Baltimore has played. And when he has played, 33 touchdowns, 20 interceptions. Okay, but hardly the kind of money that you think you're going to, they paid him more than Kansas City paid Mahomes. And so there's still some questions about Lamar Jackson right now, in my opinion. And would I like to have him on my team? Absolutely. But do I think he's an absolute sure thing? I don't. I got to see it a little bit more. And I saw it for a couple of years, 19 and 20, 2 consecutive years now, injured and played okay, but hasn't been great. So we need to see it now.
I really thought that Dan Snyder was going to stick his middle finger to the NFL, just give Lamar Jackson all the guaranteed money he wants, make the Washington Commanders look all pretty, and then sell him off. That seemed like the team to me too, when that was all going on in February.
Here's what I thought was going to happen. I thought there were going to be an intermediary between Snyder and Josh Harris to say, I'm going to leave you with a franchise quarterback, but and we're going to sign him. We're going to do all this, but now with a franchise quarterback and a 27-year-old guy, whatever Lamar is, 26, I'm going to leave you with a long-term quarterback, which you don't have right now. So instead of being 6.05 billion, it's now going to be 6.3 billion. And so, and again, maybe conversations like that did happen. I don't know, but I do know that Washington is, I don't know. I still think they're in the muck and mire of NFL teams.
I think that's fascinating, not to beat a dead horse with this Lamar point, but when the whole thing went down, I felt like it kind of smelled to me like the NFL teams were colluding in some sort of way to not give him the guaranteed contract that Deshaun Watson got, because they didn't want to be, I think, saddling themselves down the line when they had to pay their own. So it was seemingly to me like a, nod, wink, wink. Hey, let's not go and trade for Lamar so they can keep their guy, and then we don't have to pay 100% guaranteed, fully guaranteed contract to our guy 3 years down the line when he's going to be due. Did that have anything to do with it in your mind, or was it basically just nobody was interested?
Here's my question for you. If Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes were free agents and they were demanding a totally guaranteed contract, or Jalen Hurts coming off last year and they were demanding a totally guaranteed contract, do you think that some team, just one team, so that's all it would take, one team, would have given them a totally guaranteed contract?
Sure.
And I think the answer to that is absolutely unequivocally yes. Absolutely. Somebody would have. And, I don't know what's going to happen with Burrow and Herbert. They'll get their money and they'll probably get more than anybody has signed for to this point. But I just have said it over and over again and nobody ever listens. Just please look at Lamar Jackson, the player, over the last 2 years and in the month of January. One playoff win in 5 years. The last 2 years, he's been injured significantly in both years. You want to give that player a totally guaranteed $270 million contract? That's insane. It's insane. Now, obviously, I think the Deshaun Watson contract was crazy, but I know why they did it. You know why they did it. Cleveland Browns were not getting Deshaun Watson. I think I said Deshaun Jackson, sorry. The Cleveland Browns were not getting Deshaun Watson unless they did something like that. In fact, they were told, they were the first phone call by Deshaun Watson. I'm not interested. Thanks a lot for your interest. I'm going to sign with another team. I'm going to make an agreement with another team. Okay, fine. So later that night, next morning, whenever it was, Browns call him and say, hey, what if we totally guaranteed your contract? Well, now that's a different story. So, but I don't think that if you look at a guy who's missed a third of the play time because of injury in the previous 2 years and hasn't played that great when he was healthy, I just would ask the question, would you like to be the general manager who goes to your owner and says, we got to hand him for the next 5 years a totally guaranteed contract for $52 million a year? I mean, I'll just say this, that general manager would not be with that team in 3 years.
I don't know though. Like a lot of general managers, they're going to be fired regardless. Like they are going to live in that purgatory of 7-10, 8-9, retreads, trying to draft somebody who it's a crapshoot. At least Lamar Jackson, he's been one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He's got the pelts on the wall. I thought it would have been worth it for one of these teams. One of the 32, I thought would be desperate enough to say, to hell with it. Here's the blank check. I'll go down swinging with you. Yeah. I'm shocked that anybody took that bait.
I'm not shocked at all. I think it would have been lunacy for a team to totally guarantee a contract to a guy with his resume in the last 2 years.
Well, you've covered the NFL a lot longer than me, Peter. So I'm going to let you have the
I
final word
mean,
on that one.
Your opinion is worth the same as mine. All I can say is I vehemently disagree with your opinion. But there's a lot of people who have your opinion, who share your opinion. I just don't happen to be one of them.
Anybody else have, I mean, this has been amazing. You're just such a wealth of insight, Peter. You've been unbelievable. Does anybody else have anything here before we bid him farewell, get on with his life?
Any good beers in Germany you tried?
This beer right here called Stiegel from Salzburg. It's like, if you're in Salzburg, just imagine being in St. Louis and going out to a bar, you're going to have a Bud. Well, if you're in Salzburg, you got to have a Stiegel. And I really became a fan of the little Stiegel Pilsner. Reminded me very much of like a, like one of those Italian Pilsners. And so I like that beer. But as somebody over there said, when I was at one bar last Wednesday or Thursday, what do you recommend? They said, everything's good. So, I'm sure that no matter what I ordered, and I had a couple of Weiss beers because I'm a big wheat beer fan, and they were all good. It was just a very pleasant, relaxing time over drinking through Germany and Austria.
So we all love Spotted Cow, but is there a beer in Wisconsin that's a little underrated in your book? You've been,
I don't know, because I mean, this is terrible, but I just drink the cow almost every time I go there. So, and I know there's a lot of good new ones too. So I'll be determined. You know what I'm going to do, Tyler? I'll tell you exactly what I'll do. I'm going to be at Lodge Kohler one night in August, and I'm going to try a couple of different ones, and I will report to you.
We're going to hold you to it. I mean, yeah. Moon Man is solid. New Glarus, Hinterland has been blowing up out there.
Yeah,
it's been a while since I was out there, but there's so many. Yeah. Well, let's line up our trips. Hopefully, I can catch you out there in Green Bay, and we'll do it together.
Hopefully, we'll
set up some flights.
Listen, thanks for having me, and I appreciate being on with you and your people.
Thank you, Peter. That was amazing. Welcome any day, anytime. Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Right, thanks, Tyler. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you.